Donald Trump, more than 20 states have abortion bans. More than 20 Trump abortion bans. And today, this very day, at the stroke of midnight, another Trump abortion ban went into effect here in Florida.
Vice President Kamala Harris in Florida on Wednesday, hours after that state's near-total ban on abortion officially went into effect. The 6-week ban now in effect in Florida is as good as a total ban. According to data compiled by the National Institute for Health, women, on average, realize that they're pregnant at 5.5 weeks of gestation, which means that if you are the average woman, a 6-week ban would give you about 2 or 3 days to make an appointment with a doctor, see that doctor, wait the required 24 hours that Florida law also requires until a second appointment, get the second appointment, and then get an abortion. The wait time at most abortion clinics in Florida make that an impossibility. And again, many women do not even know they are pregnant at that point. Florida has the third largest population in the country, and until a few days ago, one of the highest rates of abortion in the nation. And part of that is because until just 3 days ago, Florida was one of the last places in the Southeast where a person could get an abortion at all. Now, depending on how advanced your pregnancy is, people seeking an abortion in the South may have to travel as far as Virginia or Kansas to get the care that they need. But as bad as this map looks, as bad as this reality already is for millions and millions of people, abortion advocates have long warned that this may just be the beginning. In Slate, Mary Ziegler walked through what may be to come in the crusade against reproductive rights. Quote, but the history of 6-week bans like Florida suggests that this will not be the stopping point for the anti-abortion movement. 6-week bans were designed to be a stopgap in the fight for fetal personhood. And fetal personhood, which establishes that the word person in a law or even the Constitution applies to fetuses and embryos, could have implications not only for abortion, but also for IVF and perhaps for common contraceptives. That may be just what is coming next in Florida. End quote. And while Florida voters will have the chance to vote on abortion access this November, when the Florida Supreme Court allowed that measure onto the ballot, the conservative justices signaled their approval of the idea of constitutional state personhood, which has already invited interest in a potential fetal personhood bill in Florida. Conservative groups led by the Heritage Foundation have already proposed the idea that the 1870s-era Comstock Act, which banned obscenity, is in fact a total ban on abortion at the national level. These same groups have repeatedly backed bills that push for fetal personhood. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has not said whether or not he would back the enforcement of Comstock as a total abortion ban, but in an interview with Time magazine this week, he suggested he would let states decide things like whether or not the government should be allowed to track women's menstrual cycles, and to punish women for obtaining abortions. He's used that language before. So far in Florida, Maryland, New York, and most likely in South Dakota and Missouri, voters will be deciding this November whether or not to expand the right to abortion at some level. But should Trump win a second term, we are almost guaranteed an acceleration of the nightmare already upon us. We already know what that dystopia looks like because in almost half the country, it's already here. It looks like an abortion bounty law in Texas. It looks like forcing women to travel hundreds of miles across multiple state lines in order to get an abortion. It looks like doctors moving out of their home states en masse because they can't practice medicine in good faith anymore. It looks like women being airlifted to a state that is legally allowed to give them the care they need in order to save their health. And this is just the beginning. Joining me now is Mary Ziegler, law professor and historian at UC Davis Law School and author of Roe, The History of a National Obsession. Jessica, it's just important to point this out because people thought the worst of it was when, Mary, I'm sorry, people thought the worst of it when Roe fell, that this is going to the states will do whatever they want to do. You argue, and many others have argued, not even close. These are still trial balloons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that the anti-abortion movement mobilized to have a nationwide ban, ideally through the Constitution or the interpretation of the Constitution through the Supreme Court. So we have, the possibility of the Comstock Act in the nearer term. we have the possibility of fetal personhood down the line. And both of those, I think, hinge pretty heavily on who's in the White House in 2024.
In your piece in Slate from this week, you write about the history of 6-week bans, like the one now in effect in Florida. And you point out that there is an absolute and direct line from the concept of a 6-week ban to the idea of fetal personhood. You're right that the woman who came up with the 6-week ban, quote, argued that a 6-week ban would be a perfect step toward personhood because they could dramatize claims about the injustice and inhumanity of abortion, and even rolled in an ultrasound machine into legislative hearings to permit unborn children to testify. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, so the idea of a 6-week ban was originally created when Roe was the law. And the idea was to move the line from viability, which is what Roe had established much, much earlier in pregnancy, such that most abortions would be banned, and also to kind of convince people in using this 6-week line that fetuses were in fact rights-holding persons, right? By dramatizing the idea that there was a heartbeat, that as Janet Folger Porter, the architect of these laws, explained, that the heartbeat is a universal sign of life, that anyone with a heartbeat is deserving of rights. And so this was always sort of a step toward the idea that all fetuses at all times are always rights-holding persons, and not just when Florida says so, but because the U.S. Constitution says so. So this was not intended to be kind of like a once-and-for-all compromise where the GOP would sort of get a 6-week ban and say, our work here is done. This was always designed to move toward a more sweeping nationwide ban.
You write as well in Slate, anti-abortion groups in Florida and elsewhere argue that liberal abortion laws, like the ballot initiative that voters are going to consider in November, violate the state and federal constitution by denying fetal rights. What does that mean? I just mentioned a handful of states that may have abortion access on the ballot in November.
Well, so there are two ways this could go. I mean, in the longer term, the ultimate goal for the anti-abortion movement is to have the conservative U.S. Supreme Court say essentially that fetuses are persons under our 14th Amendment of the federal Constitution, and that therefore, if voters want to secure reproductive rights under their state constitutions, the federal Constitution stops them. Basically, the federal Constitution says these state rights that you've created violate the federal Constitution. That's not likely in the near term. So in the near term, you're seeing anti-abortion groups looking for openings in state Supreme Courts, ways to expand on the kind of ruling we saw in Alabama about IVF in February. And the Florida Supreme Court has signaled that it may be one of those places, right? So if the ballot initiative in Florida fails, for example, you're likely to see anti-abortion groups arguing that the Florida Constitution treats fetuses as rights-holding persons. You may even see that argument if the ballot initiative passes, essentially the argument that this right to life for fetuses trumps any protection created by voters. I'm not sure that would work, but I think you're going to see that argument even if the ballot initiative passes. So fetal personhood is looming out there as a way to kind of override the will of the voters, even when ballot initiatives pass.
Mary, in response to Donald Trump's interview that appeared in Time magazine this week, you tweeted this. You said the argument that Trump would let states do their own thing, barring enforcing the Comstock Act as a national ban, reads differently when framed as letting red states monitor pregnancies and prosecute offenders, an ill-defined category that Trump suggests is broader than doctors. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think Trump was intending to say states' rights as a sort of way out of this impossible situation Republicans have put themselves in, essentially to say, you know, if you elect me, it's not going to make a difference when it comes to abortion, right? It's going to be no different than if Joe Biden were in office, because the states are going to just do whatever they're going to do anyway. And then you realize when he's saying this that he seems to have no actual bottom line concern about anything states would do. He's sort of, I mean, talking about things states haven't even really proclaimed an interest in doing yet, and saying that it would be perfectly fine if states did, in fact, criminally punish women extensively and did monitor pregnancies. So I think, number one, you realize that Trump would have absolutely no compunction about letting states do anything. And number two, it's not even clear that Trump's commitment to states' rights runs very deep, because, as you mentioned earlier, Ali, he's not actually committed to or rejected the idea that the Comstock Act is a nationwide ban. Because obviously, if you're for states' rights, it should be easy to say, of course, I would never enforce the Comstock Act as a nationwide ban. That's the opposite of letting each state do their thing. But he's had the opportunity to make that statement for months now and has declined to do it. So I think that raises a lot of important questions of its own.
Mary, you've written and posted a lot of important material this week that we've talked about. I just can't get past the fact that we continue to discuss monitoring women's menstrual cycles as we decide on our politics this year. Mary, thanks again for being with us and for all your work. Mary Ziegler is a law professor and an historian at the UC Davis Law School. She's the author of Roe, The History of a National Obsession.